I'm going to talk about leaderless, self-organizing, bottom-up, spontaneous, unthinking, stupid agents that lead to what I will try to claim have some relationship to what we might call social norms. This is a bit of a straw man debate in a way, because I'm quite willing, in fact, stop me and criticize these models, because I think I agree with Mark to the extent there's a whole, if you like, industry that this is drawing on, which tends to draw its assumptions from evolutionary biology and Darwinian ideas and evolutionary game theory and things like this, where in some sense we end up with agents that really are, if you like, we go too far the other way. We end up with agents that are these unthinking, rule-following. Essentially, there's no cognition in these models at all. So you could argue, what do you mean when you talk about a model like this that you claim has some relevance to social systems and complicated ideas like social norms when there's no cognition in these agents? But I'll try to make a defense of this. And in some sense, I'll make the defense that okay, the models I'm going to talk about here are very abstract. They're not actually validated. They're coming from this kind of artificial society kind of thing, and they use these kind of very simple, essentially agents are these kind of copying machines with some kind of localized randomized mutation in behavior. The interpretation of this being cultural evolution is tenuous. I mean, there's no recombination in a genetic sense. So these are really kind of like viral diffusions of information. What I'm claiming, or if I try to sort of defend this, I would say that what I'm interested in from these models is what minimal kinds of models can be produced that produce some sort of emergent process that give us some understanding of some very abstract kinds of interaction possibilities. So in some sense, I wouldn't claim that these models attempt to capture actual cognitive processes or whatever. And what I'm interested in here is how you could get, what minimal kinds of mechanisms. So Mark was talking about this idea of kind of competition and the idea of groups, and if we can work out. So I'm kind of interested in this idea of, in many kinds of interaction, you have these social dilemma type situations, right? You're in these public good type situations. So as kind of try and think of an example that sort of makes sense. You know, if we're in a social group and we don't respect private property or something, you know, if I'm stronger than you, I'm just going to take your laptop and walk away. You know, this seems to have like negative impact. If everybody behaves like that, there seem to be things we can't do that we can do if we respect private property. So we might say sort of norms of respecting private property or something are useful. So that's a case where there's a kind of some way of behaving that has a sort of positive aspect for the group, but it's in a social dilemma type situation or a public good type situation, individuals can behave in certain ways where they benefit at the expense of the group. So there's this inherent contradiction. I won't go into that. I guess most people know about that kind of thing. And often these are, there's a lot of work, you've seen lots of these models in Nature and elsewhere of, you know, let's play the prisoner's dilemma game, let's use these simple models. That's what I'm going to talk about. That's what this is about. So one way of capturing, in a really abstract way, whatever that means, one way of capturing the kinds of interaction possibilities that lead to social dilemmas is to play this prisoner's dilemma game where agents interact and there is some individual payoff that they get from interacting in some way. So in a way, what I'm laying out here is I'm going to talk about one of these models in a bit of detail and go over these there's been a whole set of these models, and I'm sort of trying to understand what they're about, because I think they say very similar things. But I'm just going to lay down what the assumptions appear to be in a lot of these models. So essentially, you have, this is where there's no real cognition. Agent action is determined by some trait, some stored value that evolves in some way. And there's no clever cognitive behavior, just like, you know, agents do a particular thing because they store a particular trait which they've copied or mutated in some way. It's like a genetic kind of interpretation. In these models that I'm talking about, where we're interested in how simple, I'm interested in the dynamics. These models try to capture a certain kind of dynamic and group competition, right? Sorry?
Can you use a darker marker? I can't read that.
Yeah, this is black, so let me... it's running out, isn't it?
Another go.
Let's try a red one. This is better, right? So what these models attempt to do or demonstrate are simple group formation processes which are dynamic over time, endogenous to the model, that emerge from the interactions of agents, behavior of agents, that drive a competitive process between these groups, so that within the groups where interactions take place between agents, within the groups, positive social norms, if you like, are selected by an evolutionary process, even in social dilemma type situations. Okay. So one way that this is done is that as well as agents having some trait that represents a behavior in a game, such as a strategy in the prisoner's dilemma game, whether to cooperate or defect, there are also some trait that represents, say, group membership, right? Or there are some set of links between groups that represent the other agents that they interact with. And the key point here is that these things, these group boundary mechanisms, the traits that mediate them, evolve over time in the same way as any other trait in this evolutionary process. So this is I guess this is evolutionary game theory, but I don't know. Now, I'm not going to go through this because actually this comes from a paper which tries to say, this kind of group selection, these kinds of group selection models that have appeared, I see them as quite different from like traditional rational action type game theory models, and they vary on a number of dimensions, but it's a matter of degree. And, it's about rationality and incomplete information. So these agents are stupid, they don't know what's going on, they don't have any real internal representation of the world around them. But the difference here, of course, is that, learning is, in some sense, the dumb agent who has no cognitive ability, who simply copies others. This is one extreme on a continuum, in a way, from, at one level, sort of the reflective, rational agent with all the information and infinite cognitive ability, to the agent that isn't really an agent at all, it's simply an evolutionary process. And in some sense, if you know absolutely nothing, okay, you have no ability to understand the world around you, just copying what others appear to do who seem to be surviving is a simple kind of social learning rule. So these are kind of, somewhere in the middle, there are kind of complex social learning rules, like not just copy anybody, copy individuals that have performed in a certain way, or propagate things that would work in a certain way. So these are all continuums, but and of course what we're talking about here is dynamic structures of interaction, as opposed to sort of mean field models that we've often seen in biological systems and even in kind of epidemic type systems. I just want to lay out in a really abstract, you can look, if you really want to find some references to some of the work that's covered here, then there's this paper which references in more detail the papers that describe the models in detail. So I don't really have time to go into that in detail, but I want to just give an overview of three kinds of groups, what I'm claiming are group selection models, and then I'll say that they're not really group selection models, and if I have time I'll try and give a bit more detail on a particular example so you get an idea of what's really going on. Okay, there's a few models that have been produced which have used this term of tag models, and all that means is it means that the trait that identifies group membership stored in an agent is an arbitrary identifier or a tag, and all those agents that store the same tag see themselves as in a group and only do their game interactions within that group, but that trait which is stored in each of these can mutate and be copied. What does that mean? It means in an evolutionary population, which is the entire population, it means that a fit individual, because it's still individuals, not group selection, it's individuals, a fit individual essentially that reproduces, or looking at it the cultural way, that is copied by another, if it's in a particular group, then by copying this tag, essentially what's happening is the individual's joining that group. And so this is a minimal way of having a simple evolutionary process produce group dynamics in which these individual agents move between groups as reproduction occurs. And what's in the other point here, which is quite important, is that there's no separation in the agent. There's no cognitive separation. There's no understanding that one of these things determines group and another thing determines behavior. They're copied as a package. And by being copied as a package, what that means is, a side effect of that in a way is that by essentially entering a group, you're also buying into the norm of that group or the behavior that's predominant in that group. So I won't go into too much detail. The key aspect here is how these boundaries are defined, and in a tag model it's very simple. There've been more of these more recently, which are, if you like, network rewiring models, you could call them, but they're very similar to this. But instead of an evolutionary trait identifying the group, a tag attached to every agent, you have each agent will maintain some links. So this is networks, so people like this. And the individuals that they link to, the other agents, they define their group. So then you've got a kind of overlapping set of groups. And then the rules then are, they're still evolutionary rules, where if you think about it, each agent maintains a list of neighbors, right? And that, in a sense, is like a tag in this sense. So that when this individual decides, oh, this one's doing better than me in an evolutionary process, its utility is higher, it copies the behavior, in this case with these prisoner's dilemma games, whether to cooperate or defect, and it also copies the links. So what is it actually doing? What it's actually doing is rewiring itself into the same neighborhood and copying the behavior. So it's a kind of reproduction. And in fact, if over quite a broad range of parameters, if you run these kinds of processes, you get kind of small world networks that are very cooperative and things like that. I mean, on a certain level, a way of seeing it is if a bad guy, a defector gets in there through some mutation or whatever, it essentially exploits its neighbors. So those neighbors over time, assuming there are other cooperative norms going on, will kind of like lose their neighbors as individuals move away. It's not a big deal. No, I don't think it is really, because I think that really it's just another manifestation of this. And in fact, it depends on certain parameter values you have. Some of these models, you have components that occur. Some of them, you get kind of smaller networks just because it's just a process of adding and deleting links. So, yeah, I don't see that as a major thing. It's kind of interesting, I guess. People like small world networks. Yeah, people like to talk about that, though. It's like they like power laws and things like this. So I don't know. Yeah, well, maybe we'll talk about it later. But there's another kind of model. This is slightly different and perhaps a bit more interesting, though I know less about it, which is these models are not hierarchical. They're not multi-level. Okay, so you have some set of groups. These groups are dynamic. The individuals are moving between those groups based on an evolutionary process. The competition between those groups drives cooperation within the groups. But there isn't another, there's a limit to what kind of levels of organization. There are just two levels of organization, if you like, the agent and the group. There's no multi-level system. This is about a model which sort of tries to give a sort of multi-level, sort of general kind of recursive way of doing this, which involves not this kind of evolutionary process, but a kind of top-down, in some sense, built-in group splitting process, so that when groups get to a certain size, they're split, and the individuals within a group are randomly redistributed to each side. Well, I won't go into too much, it's quite complex. But in theory, what that offers is some kind of way of having a sort of group selective process that can operate both at just one group level, but also at groups of groups and groups of groups. You know, the idea here is you could have rather than simple games, you might be able to have quite complex sort of, really, there's lots of these models. I mean, the first sort of term tag as the use, and some simulation of this was John Holland in '92 in an SFI, a Santa Fe Institute paper, where just messing around, he kind of goes, oh, if we attach these tags to these agents that are playing the prisoner's dilemma, we get more cooperation. We're not really sure why, but somehow it breaks symmetry. But essentially, one way of... There can be anything, right? As long as they're unique in this way I'm talking. You can have overlapping ones, but here I'm talking about simple, distinct, categorical, labels that you can attach. So really, you could just think of them as real numbers, but they don't have to be ordinal. So you could just be bit strings that could signify, you know, there's been work with bit strings where people say these bit strings represent the presence, each bit represents the presence or absence of some characteristic, like, political belief or whether you believe in this particular God or so. It really doesn't matter. They're just a way of partitioning the space of agents, where, you know, if you've got a sufficient number of tags, you know, maximally every agent could have a unique tag, and then every agent's in its own group. Minimally, every agent shares the same tag, so it's in one group.
Just a clarification, because I don't know these models. Does that mean that the tag is permanent or mutant?
Is no, it's mutable like any other trait. Think of it as, if you think of the genetic interpretation, it's a copyable, mutable.
Yeah, but in the next agent.
In the
next agent, if it's or does it?
It's mutable in the same way that any other trait is mutable in an evolutionary process.
Okay, so I'm not changing my mind.
No.
The same way I'm changing the color of my eyes.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, again, this is where I'm skipping.
That to me has always been the difficulty I have with avoid Richardson type of evolution cultural models.
Right.
Has always been this issue of assuming that my views somehow are permanent in the same way as
Yeah. No. Exactly. Exactly.
And therein lies the main difficulty of explaining.
The whole thing, what I want to get across, if I can get across one thing about these, the whole reason this process works is because they're mutable. Because by changing your tag based upon copying individuals who are successful, you are entering a successful group. And so I try to, this is just to sort of ground it, but I won't go through it. This is just a simple simulation of an evolutionary process. This is how simple these models are, where we're assuming that agents are playing the prisoner's dilemma in pairs. They're being paired within their tag group. They only interact within their tag group, a bit like a club or whatever. And then there's a process of evolution where they copy others throughout the population who are doing well, doing better than them. How am I for time, by the way? Am I?
Well, we start 10 minutes late, so you've got 10 minutes.
Okay. So I just want to, just to give a kind of schematic of what happens. So you can imagine here's two agents in this population, and one of them has a tag of 5 and a tag of 10. There's no significance to that, just one is different from the other. And here I've got one is a cooperator and one is defector. So there's two traits here, the tag value and whether the cooperator defect, binary value. So in this case, an agent's defined by an integer and a binary value, and that's it. Now, if you apply basically evolution to this, and you obey this basic constraint, which is that game partners are selected from within the tag. Now, it doesn't matter how you initialize the population. You can start by initializing them totally randomly, all unique tags. It doesn't really matter. The evolutionary process will draw together dynamically partition the population into groups. And then, of course, we can see how this group selective kind of process works. It's not strict group selection because the groups aren't being selected in themselves. What's being selected is, if you like, norms which are good at building groups. So if you see this, if blue means all defect, so in a sense, if you imagine blue is a norm which is, I don't care about the group, I just, I'll exploit anybody, I don't respect property rights, whatever. And red is, let's obey let's respect some public good to maximize our collective utility in some way. And of course, any agent that's in a group that's all blue, that's all bad guys, is going to do worse than any individual that's in a group that's all red, that are all respecting some public good. So the utility of any of these individuals is going to be higher, if playing Prisoner's Dilemma, than the utility of any of these individuals. So that seems, this will grow, because individuals will copy, and by copying the tag, they essentially enter the group, so this will grow. But of course, the ideal situation is to be this guy, and this is the traditional argument against group selection per se, which is, well, this guy, he's exploiting all these guys, he's stealing all their laptops, and there's nothing they can do about it. So actually, this guy does better than anybody. At any given point in time, a group of defectors are doing best. But of course, you can see the issue, which is the dynamical process. You don't get stability here. By doing very well, others will copy this individual. So they will enter this group copying this individual, and therefore the number of defectors will increase within the group. So by innovating and becoming a defector within the group, you create the conditions to destroy your own group, assuming others can copy you. You can only fool all of the people some of the time, basically. So that's, and if you run this is an actual output from a run of a simple model like that, you know, a 10-line program. This is history, this is time, and up here on each line it represents a unique tag value, okay, from these integers. Now, what I've done, if it's white, there's no agent holding such a value. If it's red, it means all the agents in that group are cooperators. If it's blue, it means they're all defectors. And if it's green, it just means there's some mixture. So I'm not saying how big these groups are, but I'm just sort of plotting the history. And because it's a bit complicated, I zoom in here. And because we have a history, it's the rise and fall of empires, if you like. Okay. So, of course, through some kind of mutation, if an individual mutates a tag, they create a new little group. They say, oh, there's a new group. Maybe that group, some others join, maybe they don't. So maybe you're in a group for a while. You're proposing new groups in a way. But then what happens is a group forms and starts to become one of these, you know, attractive groups. Others start to pile in, and there's a positive feedback process. And what these groups sort of grow, then, of course, at some point, a bad guy gets in through mutation or whatever, and then very rapidly, the group disintegrates, collapses, and you end up with all bad guys, and therefore it dies. So you never have any stability. At any point in time, the majority of individuals are cooperators, but also at any point in time, the bad guys are doing best. So it's just a way of kind of, it's like bulkheads of defection in a way. Minimally, you need to have a condition, or let's say a necessary condition for driving this process, is that new cooperative groups are created faster than existing cooperative groups can be invaded and destroyed. And that's related to the mutation rate. The mutation rate on the strategy, if it's just a one-bit strategy, determines how long a group can last. Because it determines how long, you know, probabilistically an individual will adopt a defective strategy. And what you actually find, this is just, it's not a very good graph, and there's some actually better graphs in other work that's referenced in that paper, which this actually shows that actually, by having a higher mutation rate on the tag, that's a necessary condition in this simple model, i.e. the tags need to change quicker than the strategies related to them. So what that means is you need to be able to create new groups quicker than you can actually innovate your behavior within a group. That seems to be an interesting... And just quickly, because I do have a really dodgy movie, but this shows you, it gives you a more kind of actual picture of what happens. If I can, it's a GIF. And this is a network one. You probably can't see it. I did this a while ago. You can't see it very well, but you see that the red are cooperators. And this is essentially the same process where they're copy links. So this is components, essentially. And it starts from a population randomly initialized but all defecting. And you eventually see, not very well, that you get this initial, if you start from an all defective state, you run for a long time until just lucky mutation puts together two cooperators, and then this thing sort of suddenly takes off. So this is there, and then individuals are copying it, joining it, because it's a better group, a better component. This expands, and then it kind of blows apart when some individuals within it find out how to defect, and you can get kind of interesting dynamics there. So let's finally just, I mean, I'm almost there. I'll leave it like that. So, okay, what I'm saying is that these simple, just these simple copying dumb heuristics can, if you look at when you look at what comes out, what you see are these groups forming that seem to be in-group behavior. So it looks like there's some social good. They're acting, looks like individuals are acting in group interest. It looks like group selection, but of course it's not. It's not. All it is agents voting with their feet. It's agents moving to those clusters that give them the best individual utility. And what's important, to understand the behavior at any given point in time, you have to understand the history. Even in a simple model like this, it's a dynamic process where you have to understand the history to understand what's going on. But the question is, these models, what use are they, right? So this is maybe coming back to what you said. You can play around with these simple models. I think they're useful because I think they give you some idea about these dynamics. But the really good thing, and I don't know anyone who's done this, would be to try and find something like this going on in the real world, perhaps, in a measurable way. And I'm not really sure how that's done. I'd be interested in what people think. I mean, I just kind of wrote that last night when I was trying to think of, well, what kind of thing. And I thought, well, actually, it's funny, actually, because everyone talks about Twitter. 'Cause it's true. But actually, those Twitter conversations, they're called tags, aren't they? The things that... Now, what did we say? One of the conditions here is it has to be easy, quick, and cheap to create new groups. There's a key here before changing behaviour. So it seems that, yeah, maybe online systems do offer this ability, and maybe that's why they maybe are successful, depending on how you believe they operate. Maybe online systems can be successful in creating these sort of productive in-groups because people can create lots of them quickly, and then the ones that work, people tend to join. So people create these Facebook groups, and then people join. One assumes if it isn't a load of people just spamming and shouting at each other, then they have some productive social good that kind of does them. So maybe there's, I don't know, maybe there's somewhere, I don't even know, I don't know how Twitter really works, I don't use it really, but I think there are these tags, right, and they define a sort of conversation group, and these unique tags sort of anyone can propose them, and then basically anyone can jump in by putting that tag in their discussion, and also anyone can monitor all the discussions going on that are about that tag, and these things come and go quite quickly, and they're everywhere. So I don't know, maybe there's something there. I'd be interested if anyone thinks there's any way that these sort of models could be useful in the sort of things that you look at or whatever.